Hello and welcome, everyone. We have the privilege today of engaging in a dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, as we do most Wednesdays. Helga is the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. Today is October 1st, 2025. I'm Harley Schlanger, and I'll be your host. You can join in the discussion by sending your questions and comments via email to questions@schillerinstitute.org or posting them on the chat page. Now, Helga, you've been busier than usual. You just returned from participating in a major conference in China and had a Zoom dialogue with youth from around the world yesterday, all taking place at the same time as the UN General Assembly annual meeting, which was focused on the crucial matter of bringing peace to the Middle East and ending the slaughter being conducted by the Netanyahu regime in Gaza. Why don't we start with your assessment of the UN General Assembly discussion, with especially the emergence of leadership from the Global South and the agreement announced on Monday of the so-called Comprehensive Peace Plan for Gaza, proposed by President Trump, which has supposedly been endorsed by Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Well, I think that the UN General Assembly this time was very different than in the past, because there were several leaders of countries who spoke very clearly about the new paradigm which is emerging among nations, namely, that the countries of the Global South really have entered a period of collaboration among themselves, among the BRICS, among the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and similar organizations of the Global South, whereby they are engaged in organizing a new economic system based on win-win cooperation, on the advantage of the other, and in that way giving the formerly colonized countries the capability to no longer regard themselves and be forced to be raw material producing countries, but to develop the value chain in their own country, and that way starting a serious road to their own development and industrialization. And several leaders of countries from the Global South spoke very well about that. I don't want to name all of them, but what was clearly impressing me a lot was the president of Ghana, the prime minister of Burkina Faso, and various others. So I think that is a reality which will not go away, because it is very clear that the economic momentum has clearly shifted to Asia. And, this was as if it needed a confirmation. Yesterday, we got the news that China has not only concluded and finished the highest and longest bridge in the world. It's at 620-meter height, and it shortens the travel time over that canyon from 2 hours plus to 2 minutes. Then it also has announced that China has the largest water management project, which is huge. It's the biggest in the world. It's larger than Navapa would be if it would have been built by the United States, and also in certain other technological breakthrough areas, fusion research and so forth. So it is very clear that China is on the right track in terms of its economy, and naturally the countries of the Global South who cooperate with the BRICS and the SCO are all profiting from that. So I think that and the conference I attended, which you referred to, was called the Beijing Cultural Forum 2025, and it brought together again many representatives of many countries, but many of them from the Global South, all engaging in a very constructive and beautiful cultural dialogue. So if the world would only go in that direction, I think we could all be relieved and go into retirement or plant roses or do poetry or some nice activity. But unfortunately, that is not the whole situation in the world. you mentioned the deal on Gaza between Israel and and the United States, one must say. And I'm looking at it. The text reads naturally very positive. The fact that many countries have endorsed it, or at least recognized its existence as a positive thing, including many of the Arab and Islamic neighbors, China, Russia, even some people in Europe. Well, the only fly in the ointment, so to speak, is the fact that it's not yet clear if Hamas will agree to it. Naturally, the Palestinian interest is underrepresented, and one has to wonder if the promise in the text that it will all lead to a two-state solution and development in Gaza is going to be true. I mean, I still remember very well that only a couple of days ago, Prime Minister Netanyahu very harshly said that the Palestinian state will never happen. And, there are always ominous statements that, if Hamas does not agree, then Israel will do it its own way, which was even confirmed by President Trump, which, given the fact that what happened in the last, 22 months or so, is a very ominous sign. So Hamas, as of this hour, has not yet made it clear what they will do. If they agree with this, it would basically be that they give up all their power, and it's not clear where they all would go. So I think I can only say what we have to do from the Schiller Institute is to redouble our efforts to put the Oasis plan on the agenda, because only if there is a comprehensive change, economically development, meaning the new name for peace is development, that program has to be put on the agenda. The Oasis plan, which we had many conferences about, this was a proposal initially made by my late husband in 1975 already, and which we actualized in the last period after the situation in Gaza exploded. So it's the idea to develop lots of new fresh water through a system of canals between the Mediterranean and the Dead Sea and the Red Sea, and then use vast irrigation systems to have agriculture, to have forestry, to build new infrastructure, new cities, and transform the entire desert region around Gaza, around many countries, Jordan, and most of these countries are just desert. The situation in Jordan is maybe the most severe. And in that way, by creating eventually, based on the development of new water resources, infrastructure in the entire region from India to the Mediterranean, from the Caucasus to the Gulf, and some of the Gulf states have proven that you can turn what previously was desert into lush, beautiful parks and forestry and agricultural areas. So that needs to be done. And, I think we keep pushing for the Oasis plan, because I'm very concerned if this plan does not work out in the short term, which I'm not extremely optimistic about, that we have to have a mobilization of all forces of goodwill to go with the Oasis plan conception, because the people there are in urgent need for such a vision of the future to have any hope to get in a life worth calling that a human life perspective. So if you agree with us, then join our mobilization, because it's extremely urgent.
We're listening to Helga Zepp-LaRouche. We've got a lot more coming. And I mentioned to you, Helga, we're receiving more questions and comments coming in from Global South countries. So if you want to know more, you want to be involved in the discussion, send them to us at questions@schillerinstitute.org. Now, here's one from Egypt. someone who's a college professor. He writes, "We are very disappointed that President Trump thinks that Netanyahu will stop the offensive and the killing in Gaza. We also object to the appointment of Tony Blair in any role. What can we in the Arab world do? So far, we've not done much."
I think to give Tony Blair any role in this is foreboding, that this is a disaster, because who is Tony Blair? He is sort of the late day incarnation of the British Empire, which is responsible why there is such a cockpit of geopolitical crisis in the Middle East in the first place. To make Tony Blair the co-governor of the new government in Gaza is like, if you want to give the wolf the task to herd the sheep, or the famous gardener, to make the the wolf the gardener, or the rabbit the gardener, protecting the cabbage. There are all these German proverbs which basically say it's the worst thing. He will, by nature, he will be incapable of doing anything good other than the interest of the British Empire, which he represents. So I think what the Arab nations should do, and I unfortunately have to agree with you, that the actions so far have been, not very laudable at all, to be diplomatic and mild. I think that, the countries like the Gulf Cooperation Council, the Arab League, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, I mean, these are, if you look at the numbers of countries who are assembled in these organizations, you have some power. I mean, it's much more than 1 billion Muslims around the world. It's, taken together, quite a significant number of capital, which is located in sovereign wealth funds. It's, going in part in investments which are sizable. So I think, it's very difficult to talk to people you don't really know in person. And unfortunately, I've never had a direct discussion with any leaders. Oh, that's not quite true. We were in Abu Dhabi in 2002, where we addressed the Zayed Center at the time. But that was the only personal experience. And, I think the leaders of these countries have to think about the future. What kind of a world are you building? And the cycle of violence which has characterized this region for so many decades can only be broken if there is a clear vision of a beautiful future for everybody. I think it's eminently possible. Thanks to China, there has been a rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. You have now the new strategic military partnership between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, which is open to other countries. And I think there were people from Iran, generals, who suggested that Iran should join such a partnership. And I think that, there must be a reflection, that if, for example, there would be a change to the paradigm as it is developing now with the BRICS and the SCO, which should be and is open to the countries of the West, and if they wanted to, even to the United States. However, that's not very likely, given the speech which was just made by President Trump and Hexas in Quantico in Virginia. Nevertheless, I think if the leaders of the Arab countries, Arab and Islamic countries, would get together and basically really decide to create a future worse, for their populations for generations to come, I think they could do a lot more. And I think, anybody who has a voice in the region should encourage them to do so.
Well, here's a question from a former ambassador from Pakistan, who pointed out that the government of Pakistan is part of the North-South Transport Corridor, which sort of plugs into the Belt and Road Initiative and is part of the integration of economic development in Asia. And he said, "We agree with the Schiller Institute. that the British Empire is the greatest threat to peace and development. We fear there will be a false flag attack on India, which could lead to another war between India and Pakistan, which could lead to a nuclear war between the two countries. What can be done to prevent that?
Well, I think to warn against it with as much details as possible is already hopefully an inoculation for those who would want to use such a false flag to use it. And secondly, I think that the chances to avoid such things in the future have been greatly improved at the last SCO meeting, because the fact that Prime Minister Modi was in Tianjin in China in the SCO meeting with Xi Jinping, and in that way the two largest countries in the world, India and China, who both have each about 1.4 billion people and represent together 35% of the human species, just these two countries, that moving closer, has, changed the landscape, because, you no longer can play as much on a division of these two countries, which has been previously the orientation of both the European Union, the British, the Americans. And I think that, any diplomatic effort ahead of time, warning against such scenarios, should be pursued, because once you have an understanding and a dialogue among the respective governments, the chance that it is being done is diminished greatly. So any kind of dialogue on that before anything happens is important and useful.
Here are some questions that came from a U.S. military veteran who's part of a group that's involved in the anti-war movement, marching for peace in Ukraine and Southwest Asia. This person says he's a former believer in Donald Trump, but he asks, and you mentioned this before, what do you think about the meeting Trump and Hegseth had with the generals? What was the purpose? And his second question is, Trump announced that the next defense budget will be over $1 trillion. At the same time, he's saying he will cut the budget deficit. How can that work with the increase in military spending, and why?
Well, I just watched this, at least the beginning of this speech by Trump and Hegseth in front of this 800 or so military people, generals, admirals, officers, and it was eerie. Now, I think, Trump entered the room and there was no applause. He normally enters the room and then all his fans go into frantic applause. So obviously this is not the routine among these military. So he complained and said, if you don't like what I'm saying, you can leave, but think about your rank and future, which I thought was amazing. He basically said, I will demote you if you don't applaud for me. I mean, that's what I got out of this. I mean, it's quite difficult to comprehend sometimes how Trump manages to do these things. These officers were sitting there for the most part, what I saw, quietly. And then Trump announced this amazing thing that, he wants to use the military inside the United States to train in combating crime in American cities. Now, as far as I know, and I'm not an expert on that because I'm obviously a foreigner, but I think that's not in line with the Constitution. I think the Constitution forbids the use of the military domestically. So given the fact that all these officers did swear an oath to the Constitution, I think this should have some aftermath discussion, at least, maybe you can say something to that, Harley, but I thought it was absolutely horrible because whenever you use the army domestically, well, I mean, you are either moving in the direction of a military dictatorship or, in any case, the democracy, whatever worse that is not looking so good. also, Hexet, who made an unbelievable speech, I mean, he obviously wants to reverse some of the wokeism and diversity and all of these things. He said fat generals and admirals are no longer wanted to be seen in the Pentagon. I mean, I'm sorry, I had to laugh about that. I mean, I must say there is some here on that, he may have a point, because I watched the so-called military parade which Trump organized last year for his birthday, or what it was. And if you compare that with the Chinese parade on the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II in the Pacific, which was an unbelievable drill, where the soldiers were moving in unbelievable precision and numbers. I mean, that was quite a difference. So, it obviously is not totally out of order that the military needs to be a little bit more disciplined. But, what he said otherwise, I thought was really hair-raising. He said, if you want to be for peace, you have to have strength, peace through strength. Now, these are words which, I get really a shudder over my back when I hear. He said, pacifists are naive. We have to be prepared, to fight any war. I mean, realistically, the United States, if they do not want, they would not have an enemy. It's as simple as that. The United States has 800 plus military bases around the world. Nobody is attacking them. There is no plan by Russia, by China to, attack the United States militarily. And I think it's just extremely dangerous, because if you think you always need an enemy, you eventually end up in having a new war. And I think the signs of the times are going in a completely different direction. And I'm not naive, I'm very realistic, because I have thought about it a lot and studied what it would do to the world if there would be a nuclear war. There would be nobody left to even consider why it happened. And, I think that the sign of the time is cooperation. If the Western countries would signal to the global majority that they intend to cooperate with them on economics, on politics, on culture, on all kinds of fields, we could move into a new era of civilization, because the BRICS, the SCO, have clearly said they do not represent or regard themselves as counter blocks to NATO or to any other bloc, but they are open for anybody who wants to join. And I really think there should be a discussion about that, because if we are now marching, like in Germany, where Merz is saying Germany is no longer at peace, not quite yet at war, but somewhere in between, these kinds of warmongering statements can become a self-fulfilling prophecy more quickly than you think. And I think, there should be a discussion about, and I think some Democrats already started to comment on that, which one should not dismiss, that it's the usual Republican-Democrat polarization, but there must be a discussion on the value of the Constitution, given the fact that the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution is coming next year, and the Constitution should be upheld at that anniversary and not removed.
Well, you're right. There's a posse comitatus, which basically says that the military is not to be deployed in the United States. The person who sent these questions also mentioned that the budget crisis and the inability to get a real recovery is part of the reason that you're having more people engaged in crime. But he made a suggestion, and I'll just throw this out to you. He said, if Trump wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize, maybe instead of changing the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War, he should call it the Department of Peace. So that was the suggestion of these veterans.
I think that's a very good idea. And, I think, it's also very clear that every billion which goes to the military buildup is lacking in the investment in infrastructure, health, education. And, I think that is definitely something where the people of the United States should demand a change in the directionality.
Now, I have two questions on the youth in the United States. The first one was an email sent to me saying, Harley, thank you for your article on the murder of Charlie Kirk and the strategy of tension. So far, it seems that overall, this has not become a chaotic explosion around profiles. Would you ask Helga if she thinks that those who intended to use the assassination to provoke a civil war may have underestimated the growing opposition of youth to what the Zionists are doing in Israel?
That may very well be the case because, I think there's also a very important discussion, what was the actual circumstances of this assassination. And I think the role of the wife and now widow of Charlie Kirk definitely was a very important intervention and contrasted very, very positively to the remarks of Trump, because she said that she forgives the murderers. And I think, I can only imagine what her emotional condition was. That showed some greatness on her part, which I think did have an impact on many people in the United States and around the world. And when Trump said, "No, I can't take this point of view. I hate my opponents." I mean, Trump sometimes, is his worst enemy because, I think Trump needs some aesthetic education. So I want to leave it at that.
Well, we know where he can get that. Now, keeping with this question of the response of youth, you had an exciting dialogue yesterday with youth from around the world, and you appealed to them to take responsibility for organizing around the principles of the common interests of humanity. What was the message you delivered, and how was the response in your view?
Well, I made the obvious point that the youth have a very important role because, just imagine if you would be 18 now or 20 or 23 and you would look at the world. In the United States, most people are convinced that the coming generations will be much worse off than the previous ones. In Europe, likewise. In China, it's different, and in Africa, it's different. But I think in the Western world, that's unfortunately the outlook. We are confronted with several crisis spots. Ukraine crisis could go out of control, leading to a nuclear war. You have the explosive situation in the Middle East. Now the questioner from before mooted the possibility that even a new war between Pakistan and India is not to be ruled out. If you don't get away from, having this enemy image all the time, you may even have a war in the Pacific, Taiwan, and down the road you could have a conflict between the United States and China. If you're a young person and you're looking at this world, which is being given to you by the older generation, it's not fair. Young people have the right to have a full life. They have the right to live for, 80, 100 years more with the advances in medicine. There's no reason why they should not have a whole century ahead of them. So it's not fair, and therefore they have a rightful place to demand a change in policy and become a determining voice where humanity should go. And I think the response to that obvious question was quite good. There was a very lively discussion where young people from Africa, from Latin America, from Europe were actually, answering to that. And there was a general perspective that we need an international youth movement of people, of young people, who demand that the nations of the world cooperate. The only way how we will get to peace, and that has nothing to do with naivety, Mr. Heck said, that has to do with the founding principles of your country, the founding fathers who were talking about the harmony of interest, that has to be applied to the whole world. And it's eminently possible because it's, the ideas that you need an enemy, that's Leo Strauss, that's Carl Schmitt, and I don't need to tell you for whom they were the philosophers. So, I think the principles of the founding fathers are much superior to those other ideas of that you need an enemy. And, I think the foreign policy of John Quincy Adams, that it's not the purpose of the United States to go abroad and chase monsters, but to build a partnership with like-minded countries, is a much better recipe. So I think young people are really more in that spirit, and I'm very optimistic that that idea will spread a lot. And if you who are listening agree with what I'm saying, help us to spread that idea.
And when is this International Youth Conference coming up in Paris?
The idea that we need to have such a discussion among young people from many countries agreeing that they have to play a stronger role in impressing the leaderships, because the leaderships of countries have to consider what world they leave to the young generation. So we will discuss a lot of things at that point. And if you have young people who are interested, then get in contact with us as soon as possible.
I have one more question for you. You just mentioned Carl Schmitt and Leo Strauss. There are people who are believers beyond George W. Bush and Dick Cheney and those guys. For example, Peter Thiel, who has a company called Palantir, which is one of the leading pro-war military industrial complex tech companies. And they're leading the trend of so-called tech companies of Silicon Valley to become part of a military deep state. So it was written to, an email said, "Can you do a LaRouche white paper to expose this? I was disgusted to see the deep connection of the tech sector in the UK, where I'm from, with the US, which was featured at King Charles' celebration with Trump of the special relationship."
Observed that also with great concern, because the whole war machine internationally only functions on the basis of the special relationship as the foundation between the United States and Great Britain, as the foundation of the effort to maintain hegemony in the world by that British Empire. It goes back to the efforts by the British to convince the American establishment to run the world as an empire based on the model of the British Empire. And I don't know if Trump is aware of it. He made a speech which was filled with references, with all the heroes of Peter Thiel, Hobbes, Locke, Adam Smith, Newton, and whoever wrote the speech for Trump really did him a disfavor by, anybody who knows history knows that these were the enemies of the American Revolution against the revolution was made. So I think the fact that these companies want to set up big investments in Great Britain obviously is an attempt to try to control the data of the world, to use increasingly AI for military purposes, which is already being used by the Israelis in the Gaza. I mean, I think this is very dangerous. There is a new paper which you refer to by Peter Thiel called the Straussian moment. You could also call it the Schmittian moment, because he starts off with basically referring to the fact that with 9/11, the world completely changed, and that the idea that you have to have freedom and security was replaced by the idea that if you want to have security, you have to give up freedom. And that is exactly the argumentation of Carl Schmitt using the Reichstagsfire, basically arguing that whoever controls the crisis has the power. I mean, this is an utmost fascist argument. And I really think people have to be aware that these people are not philanthrops, or whatever the word is, but they are really, I think, a menace, and people should be really educated about it. And maybe we take up your proposal about a white paper. That's not a bad idea at all.
Well, we did have some work by our associate, the late Renee Segerson, who first called attention to Peter Thiel, and we've been covering it to some extent in the Executive Intelligence Review. So I think we'll probably continue to do that. I had more questions for you, Helga, but I know you have other things you have to do. We have an International Peace Coalition meeting coming up on Friday. Anything you can tell us about it?
Well, on Friday we also have, I think it's the 3rd, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, today is the 1st, so it would be the 3rd. On the 3rd, we have a very important demonstration, actually 2 of them in Germany, because this is the day of the German unification. It's a holiday, and over 400 organizations have called for big demonstrations in Berlin and Stuttgart. And I also call on you, if you are watching this anywhere, if you are in Germany, you should go to these demonstrations. If you are elsewhere in the world, maybe you send messages to your acquaintances in Germany that they should go out or do a parallel support demonstration in front of your city council house or mayor's house or whatever you are. But I think it's very important that, there is an expression that people are sick and tired of this warmongering, which in Germany is very big right now. So do that, that's important. And then naturally in the IPC meeting on Friday, we will discuss about what is the situation in Germany, in particular with the planned deployment of US medium-range missiles, which are nuclear capable, which are supposed to be established there from 26 on. And that would make Germany immediately a target in any conflict, because, whoever the Russians or somebody would have to assume that these missiles are nuclear deployed or are nuclear equipped once they get sent somewhere. So it's like a middle-range missile crisis in the 80s, except the people are much less aware of the danger. So we will discuss that. We will definitely review where we stand in the Middle East. Will Gaza go in the direction of the peace treaty, which was concluded by Trump? We will have for sure an answer by Hamas by that time. So absolutely participate in that meeting. It will be very important. We will have top speakers as usual, who are the best source for a judgment and discussion. And so be there by all means.
It's Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and you can register for it at theschillerinstitute.com. So Helga, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll be looking forward to the marches in Germany. In fact, there was a march with, some say 60,000, some say it may have even been as many as 100,000 marching at the Brandenburg Tour last Saturday for calling for peace in Palestine. That was in Berlin. So definitely things are heating up. So thank you, and we'll see you again soon.
Hopefully on Friday.